Cynefin is the most ambitious project I've ever personally taken on. As a documentary, it attempts to tackle the largest and most contentious debate that I've involved myself in, rewilding. The project is relatively large in both size and scope compared to previous films of mine, involving lots of travel, meeting new people, and organisation. Given that this was my first time working on a project of this size, there were many learning opportunities and obstacles that were unforeseen. I reached out to David with an interest in his fledgling idea of a film centred on rewilding. He clearly had a vested personal interest, lending the film importance, which I thought could give the film a more honest outcome. I knew with our talents combined that we could elevate the idea to new heights. Because of his personal interest in the project and his eagerness to discuss it, it felt natural to lean towards something in the participatory mode. That way, we could capture David's keen interest and express it through interviews with those with expertise in the field. Wishing to avoid something that felt too traditional, and with aims to subvert the genre, we also wished to include some element of performance, given David's background in stand-up and music. After meeting with one of our participants over Teams, Simon Ayres, early on in pre-production, we learnt just how truly divisive the topic of rewilding is. This inspired us to attempt to open up the conversation between conservationists, farmers and rewilders that had been shut down for such a long time. We thought that through the medium of comedy we could bridge the divide, moving conversations forward rather than bickering over pedantics. This birthed the core structure of our film. The foundation of our film would be told through the medium of a comedy gig, performed by David himself, centred around the meetings and interviews with our contributors. We sought out 3 different perspectives, one for rewilding, one against, and one who wishes to bridge the divide, like ourselves. With these criteria in mind, we found Gareth, Joe and Simon. The first hurdle we encountered was that of convincing the contributors that our intentions were non-antagonistic. When prefacing our film as something that would strongly involve comedy, it immediately put our contributors on the back foot, understandably not wanting to be openly mocked in our gig and consequent film. After some work, we did convince our contributors of our intentions, though I believe this still had lasting impact on our film, especially in the case of Simon Ayres. With his unique outlook regarding the use of the term rewilding, choosing not to use it to describe his project, Simon was nervous about his representation. This, as well as his camera shyness that became apparent when before his interview he asked us if we could send him a copy of the film without his contribution, resulted in somewhat of a subpar interview. Despite his contributions to the film being paramount to the structure, we strongly considered cutting his segment entirely, eventually choosing to keep it in a reduced capacity. However, we were extremely pleased with our interviews with Gareth and Joe. Both had camera experience, were confident, approachable, friendly, and most importantly interested in talking about their positions. Both provided interviews full of character. After all the interviews were complete, we did run into an interesting problem. None of our contributors took the positions we initially thought they would. Joe, whilst practicing rewilding, did it in a way that did not negatively impact his life. Having constructed his own property on his land, nestled into the corner of some bracken, he regularly has to cut a fire break between the bracken and his house. This is technically completely against the ethos of rewilding, but is a necessary task for him. Gareth, whilst maintaining a position against rewilding, offered his thoughtful alternative methods in which he has a personal hand in nurturing native species back to healthy populations. This blurred the lines of our 3-stance structure in the film. To engage with this new structure, Simon would now act as the educator, defining rewilding and establishing the contention between each side of the debate. Gareth would then describe his reasons for disliking the approach and provide an alternative. And finally, Joe would become our middle ground, taking the approach that a successful rewilding is not totally stepping back and letting nature take its course. This new structure was greatly to the strength of our argument, as it showed that each shared a common goal that could be achieved even more effectively if working together. Not wanting to address COVID directly in our film, it of course caused our biggest hurdle, organising the gig. The original vision was an evening of music and comedy, inviting a wide variety of comics and DJs to perform around our project. We found a venue relatively quickly through David's contacts in industry, and filled out the roster with quality acts about a month ahead of the event, giving us plenty of time to prepare and deal with any potential issues that may arise. However, just a week before the scheduled performance, the venue chose to drop our booking for a different event, having to find a new venue on very short notice. Further to this, after several conversations with local councils, performing arts were in a grey area, being advised that though they are not strictly banned in the current COVID measures, that music and comedy could land us in trouble. We did find a new venue, the Corridwin Centre, but were forced to cancel all other acts. With a vision of having a debate or Q&A at the end of the gig to directly start the conversation, we invited both local farmers and those we felt may be interested in the debate. Whilst the gig went smoothly in terms of performance, many of the guests came with a different mindset than we expected, treating the event as an opportunity to catch up with friends rather than engage with our content, meaning our aims of opening the debate on the night were an abject failure. With this development, the gig could not be used in the film as we intended. Instead of directly using the footage from the event, we decided to frame it as part of the larger project, now using Davith as a voiceover that would take its place in being the foundation of the film. This was a difficult decision to make, as the performance aspect was something we were each passionate about realising. However, it was necessary to achieve a film of the high standards we held ourselves to. This has inspired us to continue our project further into the future, however, either organising an event with a more carefully curated audience outside the current restrictions, or potentially doing a performance directly to camera, expanding the film beyond the scope of the module. There were several things that I believe in hindsight were fundamentally flawed about our project. Personally, my first steps into rewilding were through the lens of Simon Ayres. Whilst he and Davith are knowledgeable in the area, as the editor, having a theoretical base from a single source is incredibly flawed, and subconsciously will have affected the film. With a wider knowledge on the topic, I believe I could have edited the film in a more thorough and thought-provoking way. I also think our interview structure was too loose, particularly in the case of Gareth. Whilst we had visited Joe and Simon before fully interviewing them, which gave us an idea of how to approach their interview, the day we met Gareth was the day we completed the interview. This lack of direction meant the content was more natural and casual, but arguably foggy in its content. Had we established clear goals of what we desired from each interview, the film could have engaged with the debate more successfully and elevated our interviews even further. Despite all the flaws I've mentioned in this essay, I'm still very proud of what we achieved and overcame as a team, still managing to turn out a good quality documentary. I've learned a lot from the process and now have a greater understanding of the participatory mode and how to approach a large-scale project. Each of the team fulfilled their role admirably, taking roles which complemented our individual skill sets, resulted in a technically sound film. Altogether, I am excited for what the future holds for the Cynefin project and believe our vision for the film will become a reality in time.